Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
What does this red button do? Oh, that's record.
Did you push it?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
By the way, we are on the air officially now.
Good.
I was just telling Will a minute ago, a lot of our listeners ride around in a truck while they're listening to us. I'm kind of like that mirror, where it says I'm closer than I appear.
Closer to what?
The microphone. So don't be deceived.
Coming to you back live from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Durant, Oklahoma.
This was the first time I've been here. I had a pretty fair time.
We've had a good time, and I've enjoyed learning about turkeys in Oklahoma too, because we've talked a lot with Eric Suttles and Marcus Thibodeau, who are both instrumental in managing turkey populations in Oklahoma.
So those are the two turkey biologists. They're also, they were tasked this year with putting this event together.
Right.
Which, hands down, awesome. I know that was a big lift for them, and I really appreciated it.
Yeah. And I don't know if we shared, this is actually the second episode that we recorded while we've been here, and I don't know what order necessarily these are going to come out in. Mm-hmm. But the other episode that we recorded, I'm not sure that we mentioned that this is the meeting of the Southeast Wild Turkey Working Group. Mm-hmm. Happens annually every summer, and it's designed to bring together all the lead turkey biologists from each state in the Southeast to come together and share, what they've been doing in their states, what they're experiencing with regards to hunter numbers, hunter harvest, poult per hen ratios, research that's ongoing. It's really a meeting of the minds when it comes to turkeys, so that they can share ideas and try to help each other out with problems that may have been faced by one state that another state's dealing with now, or vice versa.
There were several things that I was quite impressed with, but it gets my blood pumping to think about. We were just sitting in a room full of people who've dedicated their lives to turkeys.
Yeah,
they love turkeys.
Yeah, and from Missouri to Texas to Florida, and all the way up to, I guess, Virginia.
Yeah,
that's a pretty wide swath of the wild turkey's range, and includes several subspecies. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, folks, one of my big takeaways from this is that you've got a lot of folks working very hard to make sure you continue to enjoy good turkey hunting.
Yeah, that I was really proud of that, but also was kind of blown away at the amount of data being shared, also the discussion, and like you were talking about, they're trying to help each other out, and we're in a room full of experts on the topic, and we're looking at everybody's data that they're presenting from the states and these research projects that are going on. I learned a ton, but also I got a lot just out of the discussions, hearing the questions. We don't all agree on everything, not just the discussion, I think, is really fruitful.
Yeah, not only during the formal meeting hours, but we have, everybody's having sidebar discussions during every break and every meal. And, we participated in a few of those, but there's no telling how many are going on concurrently that we're not even a part of, where people are sorting stuff out, figuring it out, bouncing ideas off each other. Yeah,
I really appreciated that aspect of it. And everybody has the same mission. Mm-hmm. We all want to have a lot of turkeys
and let people hunt them as much as they can.
Yeah, providing opportunity. How many times have we talked about opportunity?
Opportunity has been a major topic of discussion, particularly as it pertains to states that are not at the numbers that they once were at. Yeah. Like, how do we still maintain that while making sure these populations are sustainable?
Yeah, I think that was at the forefront. It was obvious. that is balancing opportunity with the resource sustainability. Another thing that it became very obvious. I mean, well, first of all, I was taking notes. I don't know if you were. There are a bunch of people here that we need to try to get on the show.
That's right.
They're doing awesome stuff. The data is really interesting. It was all across these states. We have covered some of the stuff that was covered here, but it made me realize we're not content limited.
No.
We're going to be able to cover some content here on the show.
Absolutely.
If we can get folks to keep listening to us and keep coming on the show.
But you shouldn't question my note taking because I took way more notes than you did.
Well, you know what? I try to take notes, but then now I realize when I don't take many, I can't read my writing. So these notes are actually song notes. Well, actually, you can't tell the difference. It looks like a tab or something.
This typifies the difference in me and you, right? Because not only do I have more notes, but I can read all my notes.
Yeah.
And I went back through and I typed up all my handwritten notes into my iPhone notes for this podcast.
Yeah. What I did was actually just put a star by all the things I could read. But the other difference is...
You needed a star to tell you that you could read it?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of hiding in there in the mess, The other thing is, it doesn't... I just kind of take a smattering of the things I wrote down because, everything I wrote down was brilliant. So just
because
pull
you
out
wrote
some
it?
nuggets, Pull out some nuggets of just...
It was brilliant because you wrote it?
No, it had nothing to do with me. So, we got a little bit sidetracked there, but what I was going to say, one of the things that made me realize when we were getting all these updates, we basically went through every state.
Yeah.
And got an update on the status of turkeys and all the stuff that they're doing, which is really cool. But also at the forefront of that was the poult per hen data from the surveys, which is where the hunter participation comes in to help us collect data.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me after we went through like the 8th state. It's like, we really need to participate in that. Mm-hmm. I've already submitted a few in Florida personally. Mm-hmm. I don't think that I have seen any in any other state, but yeah, if you're out there wanting to help, that's one way that's extremely helpful.
Yeah.
Your state has a survey going on right now. All these states are standardized. If you're in the Southeast and some of the Great Plains states, it sounded like are doing similar things.
Yeah. Not all states allow hunter participation, but many of them do.
So you very well may be in a state that has a survey open right now that's standardized so that basically we can share all this data and look at the broader trends and compare notes. And I think it's a really great thing for turkeys just in general. So if you haven't been participating in that, I want to stress that again to make sure you seek out that. It should be pretty easy to find for you in your given state. I know Florida has one going right now. Does Alabama have one?
I don't think so. I think that there's like I'm not sure about that.
Yeah,
there's not. It's not. If there is, it's not widely publicized. It may go out to a small subset of hunters.
So there's different ways that states do it. It's not that they're not collecting that data; they just may be doing it in a different way.
Right.
But Florida's public participation is available. I believe Georgia's is as well.
Yes.
Tennessee's just switched.
Yes.
We saw that today.
Right. They've been trying it out for the past couple of years.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of states that have them going on. So just, type in the poult per hen survey in whatever your state agency's called and see if you can find it. But it did really show. Pretty much all of them had the same data that we could compare notes on all these states, which I think is a really important thing to have.
Yeah. And as you would expect, there were several states that reported that, poult per hen ratios is the same story that we've heard and we've talked about many times on here, that are, experiencing this slow decline and they're less than 2 poults per hen.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a couple states that broke that mold that reported this year, and one of those was Louisiana. That reported that their poult per hen ratio is up, and in fact, they had 3 regions of Louisiana, and I think that was out of maybe 6 total. Can't remember how that was broken down, but they divide their state up as many states do into different regions that have biological or ecological similarities, and in statewide poult per hen ratios were up, but in 3 of those regions, they reported that they had a poult per hen ratio of over 3 in 2022, which is incredible.
That's excellent. Yeah, I made notes on basically every state. I just wanted to kind of get a broad look at that. But Oklahoma, their statewide one was 2.88, so that was really high. Solid. Yeah. So I was impressed with that. Part of North Carolina was over 2, over in the low country. Mississippi had parts of it. They were at 2.3 poults per hen in 2022, but they had some regions of the state that were over 3. Yeah, and it was a near record statewide. Right. But one thing that was really since the 80s, I think, is what he said, isn't it? I think so. And one of the other really interesting things that Adam Butler shared about Mississippi is that their hunter numbers have been increasing. We've talked some on the podcast about many states having declining turkey hunter numbers. Yeah, it was like the past several years, it's been exponential growth in turkey hunter numbers in Mississippi. Isn't that something? So their hunter numbers reached an all-time record in 2022. Yeah, that's really cool. Another interesting thing that Adam shared for Mississippi that was really thought-provoking for me, and it was a very preliminary analysis. It's just a correlation that he threw up there. It's just kind of a, you want me to even say it? Or well, he said it publicly. Yeah, I mean, it was just something, I treat this preliminary data. Well, something that makes me appreciate Adam, and a lot of these biologists are the same way. Like, he's so curious. Yes. And like he's also very thoughtful about his curiosity and very skilled. Right. So go ahead. So this is something that I would treat as a prompt for a hypothesis to look further into, not as something that is looked at conclusive. But he reported that he said, he's just been keeping track of how many diseased turkeys are reported to him in a given year. And he just it sounds like he almost just has like a notebook, or maybe it's as formal as an Excel spreadsheet. And he just opens it up and says, I got a diseased turkey from this county this year, sent it off to Squidus, and this is what the test results said. And this year he decided to do a little something with that, and he found that the number of diseased turkeys reported in the prior year correlated with the poult per hen ratio the following year. In other words, negatively correlated. Yeah, in other words, in years where he had more reports of diseased turkeys the following year, the poult per hen ratio would be down, and vice versa. That brings up a good point. It was one of the major points. By the way, folks, we both agreed we were going to take notes through this, and then we were going to record this, but we have not shared what both of us have taken from it directly. So you're getting to see us unpack all this stuff together, and I don't really know exactly where Will's going to go. I'm not really sure if I know where I'm going to go, but we're gonna see when we get there. We're going to go there. Yeah. That is sort of highlighting something that I think was somewhat of a theme in the meeting. There were several states that were looking into disease stuff, and there's a lot of really cool stuff that's coming. There were some numbers shared in some of the states where there were a few diseases that were relatively prevalent in the samples. Right. And like you said, there's some really cool stuff that's going to come out of this disease work. And the one that stands out to me is that North Carolina just completed this major study where they had hundreds of turkeys. Yeah, we covered it on one of our episodes. Yeah, that was with Chris Moorman, if y'all want to go back and listen to that and learn more about the North Carolina private land turkey study. But they captured hundreds of turkeys throughout this effort, and they were collecting blood and swab samples from all of them for disease testing. And they're in turn going to be back and correlate the vital rates that they documented for each of those turkeys using telemetry, whether that be radio or GPS, with the
disease.
Yeah, so the vital rates,
Results.
also looking at habitat use and basically all the stuff they were collecting on the turkey. Now they're going to get a disease status of that turkey, and they're going to be able to go back. And that's something that I actually was thinking about in the Florida project.
Right.
We're going to have the same kind of data. I bet that's pretty common across all of these studies. It'd be really cool if eventually we can put those data together across a lot of
I mean, it'd
studies.
be super useful to know, like, if there's a disease out there that even if it doesn't kill the hen, maybe it's correlated with lower nest success rates.
Well, and think about like what the thing you were talking about with Adam. Think about if you start putting like the poult per hen data that we're contributing in all these states together with the prevalence of diseases, and you can potentially predict what your next year's poult numbers are going to look
almost like they
based
do in like Texas and Oklahoma with rainfall.
It's like forecasting almost. Yeah, that's pretty interesting, and I thought it was pretty exciting. Before we move on, I did have a question for you. I was just going to put you on the spot, see if I couldn't draw a little bit of that Alabama brain out. What did you find most interesting, or was there anything that was like striking to you?
Yes.
Then when you heard it, you're like, what? Wait a minute.
Yeah, there was.
There were a bunch of them for me, and I tried to think. I narrowed mine down to one.
I think you know what mine's going to be.
I don't know. There was a bunch of things that were kind of. I wouldn't say startling or shocking. I don't think those are the right words, but there were several things that I was like, my mind just started racing when I heard it. Mm-hmm. So go ahead. What's yours?
So what surprised me the most was that Patrick Whiteman from the University of Georgia
that was one of my top three.
Gave a great presentation on adult male survival, in other words, gobbler survival.
Yep.
And they had data in that study from Louisiana, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And so these are states that, I mean, obviously everyone knows, Louisiana is very different habitat-wise from North Carolina. And then, of course, you've also got all the variation in season frameworks that go along with each of those political boundaries, right? Like all these states harvest birds very differently, different start dates, different season lengths, different bag limits, and so on. And they found no statistical difference in survival of adult males across sites or years.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that something? So we've got, some variation in things that we think of as key to the structure of the seasons.
Right.
And then there's no variation in harvest rate.
Right. And to add to that,
or no statistical, there is variation. That's not just all one number, but it's not statistically like we didn't pick it. Like he didn't show data that was like, oh yeah, you can obviously see the effects of the season structure on.
Right. Now, he did say that there was a very obvious difference in adult male survival between a hunted site in South Carolina and a non-hunted site in South Carolina. Specifically,
the SRS stuff.
Yes, survival was 0.83 on the Savannah River site that's not hunted versus about 0.5 on a nearby hunted site.
Right. I think we should try to get Patrick or one of the team. There's a bunch of researchers working together on that. But I would like to get one of them on to talk about that study because I think it's really interesting.
Right.
But it also brings up some important questions about how if we need to reduce harvest.
Well, yes, and to add to that, going back to all of his data from the hunted sites in all four of these states, they also reported, and it's not surprising, but it's good to have confirmation of, that the vast majority of the hunting mortality happens during the first couple weeks of the season. And here's the point why it made it, probably the most eye-opening thing that I learned at this conference is that, if we're trying to, if we find ourselves in a situation where we need to increase male survival to accomplish objectives related to population sustainability, what is the mechanism we use to do that?
Yeah.
Because these states
intuitively, you're like, oh, let's reduce the bag limit. Well, we have data from a variety of places that suggests that that may not be an effective way to protect birds from harvest.
Right.
Or moving the season later or shortening the season, that doesn't consistently reduce the number of times taken either.
Right. I mean, you have by far most hunters are only killing one bird.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think I saw data from a couple of states
there was a couple where it was either 0 or 1, and those two were the vast majority of hunters.
Yeah, and I specifically remember seeing that a couple of states reported that fewer than 10% of hunters kill that second bird where it's allowed. Mm-hmm. It's like 5 to 8%, somewhere around there was the number I feel like I remember.
Yeah. The intuitive reaction for most people, turkey hunters, is, oh, well, if we're going to reduce harvest, we just reduce the bag limit and that'll do it. But that's not what data show in certain places. And then his study is indicative of that to me, that the season frameworks may not be the way to get to that. If that's what you need to do, if we do all this work, which there's lots of people working. I mean, obviously from here, there's lots of people, great scientists working on all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Lots of different problems that have been, or hypotheses for problems that have been postured that people are working on all over the place, which is awesome. But if we come to the conclusion that we need to reduce the number of males being harvested, how do you do that?
Good question.
So I think maybe we ought to save that, let people roll that around in their head for a minute, until we can get one of those guys on. But I think that'd be a really interesting conversation.
So let me turn that back around on you. And what was the most surprising or eye-opening thing that you learned here?
Well, that was one of my top things. There were a couple of other things that stuck out, but I kind of, since you went with that one that has a real practical application for everybody, I thought maybe I'd just give a gee whiz one.
Okay.
Because I wrote down a couple of them.
It's not from Anna's presentation, is it?
No. Because
that was a close second for me, and we can get back to that one in a second.
To Anna Muller's?
Yeah.
Well, we had an episode with Coulter Chitwood that was releasing. It was the first time they, I think, publicly talked about the study.
Yeah.
So you can go back and listen to that. But we had a couple of presentations related to that study.
Right.
But we'll come back to what you're thinking about on that. The Virginia update. There was a little tidbit that was stuck in there.
Okay.
And I don't know how many people picked up on it, but I sent you a message. So we're literally sitting in the front row. The speakers, 2 of them spit on me. That's how close we were.
Good thing COVID's over, right?
If they had been drumming, they'd have been in my pocket. You know what I mean? So we're right there in the front row, and
which I chose our seats. Marcus yelled at me for it. He was like, "Why are we in the front row?
You really want to be in the front row?" No. Now I forgot what I was talking about.
There was a nugget in the Virginia study.
Yeah. So I was sitting there, and I heard it, and I kind of just listened, because sometimes when somebody says something that really resonates, you can hear rustling or some whispering or something.
Well, I missed it because you texted me about it, and I was like, what's he talking about? Because I didn't hear that. I think I was writing something else down.
Yeah. He just said it in passing. But he brought up, he presented a whole bunch of really cool stuff. I mean, it was, very good information about the state and the status of the state, which we haven't given a status on that. We can't do them all in one episode, so we're going to eventually, hopefully, get to all of these states and try to keep going back to them. But he said that in some of the counties up in, I think it was in the northwest part of the state, I don't remember that, don't hold me to that, but it was in part of the state, they had a huge locust hatch.
Right.
And in those counties, they observed a 50% increase in harvest of turkeys after the locust hatch.
2 years later?
Yeah. I was like, what?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? 50% change?
That's amazing.
So he wasn't showing us data on slides,
right.
So I don't know.
It was just something that he was like, maybe there's something there. He just threw it out there.
Yeah, just kind of threw that nugget out there. And I mean, for me, it just got my mind racing. And I was like, I mean, first of all, it's just gee whiz. Second of all, I don't know the context. So I don't know how strong that is or how interesting it is. But I also thought, well, I mean, we're talking a lot about poults and how worried we are about poults. And what do poults eat? Bugs. And what are cicadas?
Yeah.
They're big bugs. Yeah. You know, and they're just laying around everywhere when you have a big banner crop of hatch. And I just was like, does that, I mean, that could lead me to a new hypothesis. Maybe we have some insect limitation.
Yeah. Or I'm with you there, but just I'll play devil's advocate. Like, what if that insect hatch was so unusual that, you know, it's almost like unattainable by man? Like, maybe we could never achieve that level. Yeah. Assuming the relationship that you're inferring is actually there.
Well, I know I'm not saying that we're going to go throw out a bunch of locusts
or manage habitat in such a way that they're that available and abundant.
But I still think you can gain something from thinking about that. If insects are a limitation, habitat management practices that promote insect availability might be particularly important. That, to me, indicated that it's plausible that could be a limiting factor. Right. And what are we trying? We're trying to fix the low leaky hole on the bucket. Mm-hmm. So if insect abundance is limiting, then that would be pretty important information to know. Now, this is the way that it was said at this point. It's just an anecdote, as far as I know. Yeah. I don't know what. Right. But I just thought that was one of those gee whiz things that really got my head spinning. Like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. That would be pretty important. Like we've been kind of talking about food as not being limiting for turkeys and it's something else. Yeah. And then there's a food source that you get this
becomes unlimited.
But I mean, 50% change in harvest. I mean, come on, man. That is like, we're talking about swings in harvest of 10%. And we're like, oh man, that thing really changed. And you're talking about 50%. And the other thing, maybe those counties kill 8 birds a year on average. I don't know what the context is, but that was something that was said that just kind of piqued me. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. And I wanted to ask a question about it, but.
Well, that's the thing sometimes. I mean, we talked about, you know, the very preliminary. There's the Alabama brain. The very preliminary.
Man, I'm going to get you.
The very preliminary data that Adam shared, and that, you know, we heard from Virginia as well. And, you know, those types of little anecdotes, when somebody throws it out, there may be something there that spurs hypotheses, and then sometimes hypotheses spur us to design research, and then we find out the truth.
It's like this scientific method just kind of unfolding, and it's stemming from curiosity. That's one of the things I really appreciate about Turkey World. Man, there's some curious sons of guns around here. Yeah. You know?
Everybody's scrambling.
Man, I need to know
out everything we can.
Yeah.
And so that plays right into the next thing that I was going to bring up.
That's why I brought it up.
Which perfect segue. which was mentioned by Anna Muller from Oklahoma State. And, you know, we had Coulter on. He was part of this paper too. Yeah. And we had him on several episodes back to discuss it, and that was the first time I think they had thought about it. I'm sorry, I think that's the first time that they had talked about it. Yeah. But the way that she laid out some of the information that they found in that study was very interesting to me. She said that, I'll just go by the numbers real quick here. So they did a literature review of papers from 1970 to 2021 to inform this modeling exercise that they completed. If y'all want more information on this, again, go back to that episode with Coulter Chitwood.
Yeah, it was pretty dense.
It was dense. But here we go. By the numbers, 89 papers they found have measured vital rates for turkey populations.
In the eastern subspecies.
In the eastern subspecies only, from 1970 to 2021. None of those have data on poult survival from 28 days to 365 days.
Yeah, I put a star by that one. Not only was it a gem in there, I can also read my handwriting.
0 of 89 had that data. Only 6 of the studies that they were able to find had data on poult survival even to 28 days.
How many?
6 studies out of 89 had data on poult survival to 28 days.
If y'all are trying, maybe some folks out there are driving and they can't take notes. That's not good.
Thank you.
We'll just simplify it. That's not very good.
No studies presented data on poult predation.
Yeah.
They just knew
on that too.
They just knew that they were here today, gone tomorrow. Yeah. Right?
They don't know why.
And generalizing that out, hold on, I'm tying it up here. Generalizing that out, they had almost no information on what's driving any vital rate. Not just poult survival. Extrapolate that out to nest success, adult survival, males, both males and females, etc. We have almost no data on what is actually we have tons of data on what vital rates are, with the exception of the ones I just mentioned. But we have no information on the mechanisms, the processes that are leading to our findings related to those vital rates.
What is changing survival from 60 to 30?
Right.
What is the process happening?
Right. And to take that one step further, as you and I discussed, I think it was last night, we have no data on effect sizes of management actions for turkeys.
None of them.
So we know habitat preferences, and we know that nest success is higher in this vegetation community versus that vegetation community, which is good information to know.
It's necessary for you to form hypotheses.
And it helps inform management, and I don't think that we should abandon those efforts towards managing these cover types that we know that are beneficial to, say, nest success rates and poult survival rates. But that being said, I cannot tell you, because I don't have the data, by what percent your brood survival is going to increase if you change X or Y on your property.
Yeah, we haven't done it. We have correlative relationships, which again, you don't throw this out, but it's not as good as having manipulative data where you can isolate the effect of a factor and quantify its effect size relative to other things.
Yeah.
And when I said we don't have it on any management action, I mean, it's basically whatever you want to pick. Habitat management, predator management. I mean,
hunting frameworks.
I know. So
that's a problem.
Yes.
But we do have some more informative correlative data that I would also like to share, because this is a nice segue.
Is this still from?
It's closely related.
And I want to tell you what, Anna is a smart person.
Are we leaving that study too quickly?
Well, I mean, we've covered it in detail. I really want to have Anna on at some point to talk about it, but she's just, I don't know. She's
on another level than us.
Yeah, she's definitely a level or two up.
I'm
still trying to count. She's got upside down Y's in her.
I don't know where she's from, but I bet she didn't learn math in Alabama like we did.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she's from out west.
But talking about not having data on management actions, but we do have good correlative data on how things change from one vegetation type to another, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
I know where you're going with
this. David Moskicki.
Moskicki.
Is that?
I don't know if that's how you spell. I don't know. I don't know how to spell it. I can't read my writing.
David, I'm sorry in advance, but he's from NC State. He's the graduate student that collected the data that Chris Moorman partially shared during a previous episode as well. He presented some additional information at this meeting and
habitat selection data.
Yeah, and just a brief recap, if you hadn't listened to that podcast, big sample size, 355 hens, 414 nests, and he reported this morning that hens selected for nest sites with greater understory cover of woody plants as well as forbs, and also areas that had greater visual obstruction, so hiding cover, in other words, for the nest site.
I took the same notes.
And then, so that was at the nest site scale, but he also looked at vegetation conditions that were preferred at the nest territory scale, so a larger area.
So, basically, like, what is the home range of the animal during that nesting period?
And they tended to select for nesting territories with more shrubland and herbaceous plant communities.
Yep.
And that was supported as being...
and one thing I wanted to add, at that smaller scale, it was percent forb. At the larger scale, they didn't have it that fine. It was just herbaceous.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So it include forbs and grasses and grass lakes.
And that was beneficial to these hens because nest survival increased the closer the nest was located to shrubland. Mm-hmm. And they also found that nest survival was greater in areas where when a hen nested in an area that had more edge. Yeah. So that's usually a proxy for diversity of cover types and stand ages. Yes. In my experience.
Well, so not only did they find strong selection, and that is really important, it also was very similar to a study that was presented by another graduate student from UGA, Nick Bachner, as a PhD candidate, I guess now.
I think he's about to finish up this year.
Yeah, and he was looking at some similar types of things. A lot of us, and you and I are going to be included in that, have similar types of data, and we're kind of doing different things with it. But they have similar implications often. But Nick was basically looking at what the home range looked like of the animal pre-nesting and then during nesting. And he also had some pretty interesting findings. One of the ones that I wrote down, and I put a star beside it, is that the birds were avoiding pasture. Did you see that?
I did not see that.
Yeah, he said that during his presentation.
During nesting?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just found that interesting because, I mean, we kind of been talking about pasture grass here of late, but I just found that pretty interesting. And the other thing, the reason it was really related to David's work, or I interpreted it very similarly, is Nick was looking at it from the point of view of the behavior of the animal and how it's deciding where to nest and what is influencing success. And he had a striking relationship that when the animal had several locations that it visited regularly, we'll just put it that way to make it simple.
Yeah, it was a lot more complicated than that, but suffice it to say.
But we're just going to bring it down to Alabama brain level.
Where the goats can eat it.
Yeah, yep. So essentially, if you think about this animal's nested and she has already kind of scoped out some areas she likes around it, when she has lots of those areas around it, and if she has lots of those areas that she's visiting regularly, he found a pretty striking relationship with nest success. The more, and I kind of interpreted that as you have more high quality areas around. I don't know if
she's not limited in her choices.
Right. She's got lots of choices. That's exactly right. And I kind of interpreted both of their work similar to that.
Yeah, makes sense.
And one of the things that goes with habitat quality and diversity and heterogeneity, we have mosaic, we have all kinds of terms for that, these kinds of concepts. But I'm interpreting that as you're giving the animal lots of choices. And when they have lots of choices,
they can choose what they are adapted to perform the best in.
Seems to confer higher success. So it was pretty interesting, thinking through several of their studies. And we're also kind of generalizing what they found, and also particularly on Nick's. That wasn't really the purpose of his project per se, but that was one thing that I took from it that was kind of related to David's.
Can we stay on habitat for a minute?
I think our audience is tired of habitat.
Oh, are they? Well,
no,
they should probably
they're definitely not.
They should probably find a different podcast then.
Well, habitat is so important.
Yeah. One thing that I thought
Yeah, go ahead. I have one thing that was related to that statement I just made.
Go ahead.
And it may be where you're going anyway.
All right.
One of the things they were all looking at is the risk or the success of the nest. Most of the nests are being lost to predation, and we're still talking about habitat quality influencing the predation risk of the nest.
Yeah. I'm glad you got that in there because that's not where I was going.
Oh, good.
All right. So you may not even picked up on this, but I thought it was just like one of these little tidbits that was very fascinating to me because it shows, while we're talking about habitat, it shows, I think, how much the hunting public values habitat. But there was a presenter, Betsy York, from ODWC, that's Oklahoma's State Wildlife Agency, and she specializes in human dimensions work. So basically surveys to understand how hunters feel about certain things. And one of the things that they were interested in one of the surveys that she presented was how they should allocate funding, conservation funding. Yes. And so they sent out a survey related to that, and she reported back that hunters would want a range. It was a range 65 to 75% of the money that they had available to go towards habitat management on
over infrastructure,
public land, over infrastructure. And of the money that they wanted allocated to infrastructure, that was mostly, because that may be hard for some people to get their minds around without an example. That was like, maintaining roads and maintaining signage across the wildlife management area so people can get where they want to go, right? But the remaining 75-ish%, they wanted to go to habitat. So hunters value that.
Yeah, that was pretty striking. I'm glad you brought that up. I had made a note to talk about that, and it's a good time to talk about it. So not only are we talking about habitat a lot, I think that's also probably indicative that, that metric you just shared, our audience, who are largely not biologists, I think, they're probably mostly hunters. They don't want us to leave habitat, I don't think.
Yeah.
Like, they value that. They want to know how to change it on their land for the better, for the resource. And they show, you sent a survey out like that, which I thought was pretty awesome.
One thing I will caveat that with, and that's where I think it becomes important for us to educate, is that I would imagine hunters value certain habitat management practices more so than others. And, that's where this outreach effort and this education effort comes from, is trying to get hunters to value, eradicating exotic pasture grasses, for instance, doesn't look sexy, isn't intuitive, that it's immediately going to benefit turkey populations, but valuing actions like that over, for example, planting a chufa patch for turkeys, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I was kind of going a similar route with what I was going to say. The things that many of those hunters often seem to value are not necessarily the habitat improvement that we would most move the needle with. And I think field management in particular is a good example of that.
The other thing that I wanted to mention while we're on this topic of habitat, I was inspired by what Mississippi and Missouri announced at this meeting.
Yeah, and Texas too. Texas came in.
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah,
he didn't have his formal.
Jason Harden mentioned it.
Yeah.
He didn't say it during his talk, but he chimed in during the question and answer session. But
no, he mentioned in his talk he didn't have a slide on it.
Okay.
Yeah, during the questions part of his thing, he mentioned.
But it sounds like both or all three of those states are launching some pretty ambitious private lands habitat initiatives for turkeys.
Yes. I loved seeing that.
Yeah.
I made a note on all of them. I felt the same way. They are putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah. In Mississippi, it sounds like even applied and successfully. Well, Adam said he said they applied for 3 federal grants to help out with that initiative. They were thinking they might get 1 or 2 of them. They ended up getting all 3. And over the next several years, they're going to have millions of dollars to allocate towards putting turkey habitat on the ground on private land.
Yeah, on private land. That's a beautiful thing.
And
same with Missouri. Yeah, the amount of what they're investing in habitat.
Right.
that's just phenomenal.
Talking about going out and working with landowners, helping them evaluate current habitat conditions for turkeys, making that assessment and determining what management actions, if it's not aligned with what is, preferred and required, then implementing those management actions and giving them money to do so, to get it to where it needs to be optimal.
Yeah. And that's similar, the Wild Turkey Federation and a lot of the state agencies have a cost share program,
right?
Which a lot of our listeners probably know about it if you have one that's in your state. Florida is one that's really aggressive about it, so I've really appreciated that. The amount of habitat that's going on public land that's turkey hunted for turkeys, putting money into habitat management. And the idea is to get places restored to a maintenance level where it can be continued in perpetuity in the future. And so we have lots of different kinds of programs like that are going to put a lot of habitat on the ground. I wrote down a note on the Texas update. He said at some point that there was 23,000 acres of habitat work. I think he was talking about the cost share program in that state. But that's the number he said.
Okay.
So efforts toward improving turkey habitat.
Right.
There was 23,000 acres through the particular program he was talking about. I didn't write down the specifics of what the program was, but
yeah, that's awesome. And while we're on this, the NRCS, who we talked about, I guess, kind of in a negative light on a previous podcast when we're talking about the CRP program and how it had some unintended negative consequences for turkey populations while trying to achieve other objectives.
Yeah.
But NRCS also has some habitat cost share programs that landowners can use to implement a lot of the things that we talk about doing for turkeys on this podcast. And I think we've probably said this before, and we need to add it to our list to make sure that we get to it. We need to have somebody that is very knowledgeable on those various programs come on this podcast to make people aware of those opportunities.
Yeah. Well, that's something that I talked to Mark McConnell, who we've also had on here previously, but I've talked to him several times since we've been here. But in this particular instance, I started talking to him about programs, NRCS programs, and he has some funding through some of their research funding avenues to look at various things. But one of the things that he was looking at that I want to also do with turkeys, I've been mulling it over and trying to figure out funding wise how to get that portion of the study funded. But he's looking at currently with quail how the CP42 practice, the pollinator practice, how that influences quail productivity.
Yeah,
particularly for brooding. So I'm trying to do a similar thing, as you know, with turkey poults, and I haven't quite figured out how to fund the that part of it. But I want it to be part of the field management strategies that we do with some of the poult work that hopefully is on the horizon. So another NRCS program is for a different purpose. But part of the one of the conservation practices that could be pretty beneficial for turkeys.
Maybe one we want to take advantage of when we're trying to implement turkey habitat.
Yeah. So he was doing some work on quail. I think that will, we've said it many times, especially the poult rearing stage for turkeys overlaps a lot with quail. So, that'll probably give us a pretty good indication of once we get caught up on what he's finding. It'll give us a pretty good idea.
Right.
But I still think it needs to be done with turkeys, especially since we've been talking about all this grass. And I mean, we got a lot of grass. Craig said we all have our grass problems.
Yeah.
A lot of those practices would be going in those places, replacing grass.
Right.
Which I think is one thing that would be really beneficial, is just to replace the grass with something.
Yeah. Kill the grass, folks.
You remember that one?
Yeah.
We need to do one episode that we just go through what the favorite quotes were. Maybe when we have a 50th episode or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can poll the audience and let them tell us what their favorite quotes were. I think that'd be fun to go through some. We definitely had a couple that people like.
Yeah. Well, what else stood out to you? Anything else? I have a couple more tidbits, but nothing these are more fun facts, not stuff that's burning me up,
Yeah.
to get out there.
Well, I know we're going to try to get one of the biologists in South Carolina on to talk about give a South Carolina update. We have a lot of listeners there, and they've got a lot of cool stuff going on.
A very active state for turkey research.
Yeah, it's very active, and so he talked about one study that I had not heard about, but I've been thinking about similar stuff. Yeah, and I did a post on this like last year, where I went through all the literature, and you know about it. You were talking about genotyping the human scat.
This was one of the ones I had remaining too.
Yeah. So they had a study just recently that they were genotyping scat, not human scat, coyotes.
Only I do that.
They had bobcats, coyotes, and gray foxes.
Yeah. So backing up, I think we briefly touched on this before. But it's very difficult to pick up turkeys, any birds in general, and scat, scat remains, because they're so easily digestible. So if you don't have like the example that you used when you were turkey hunting a couple years ago, and you found
the turkey toenail,
that's obvious, but you don't always get that, right?
Yeah, most of the turkey is pretty digestible,
right?
So you're just going to have a handful of scat, and there's not going to be anything obvious that links any parts of that to the turkey. That doesn't necessarily always happen. So that's, and the other problem in the literature is often we just kind of lump things into groups, and we have a lot of studies that lumped everything as bird.
Yeah.
And we don't know what proportion of that was turkeys.
Right.
I'm going to go back to the post where I did that lit review and compare it to their numbers.
Yeah.
I think that'd be cool, because I've already done all the literature review on the topic.
Right.
I'll have to go dig that up.
So they used DNA. They picked up turkey DNA in the poops,
in the scat,
from predators.
Exactly.
Which is wild if you think about it. Yeah, I mean,
I wonder how many gloves they picked up.
They're obviously smarter than me and more capable.
Well, I thought it was really interesting. The point, and this was Jordan Youngman, I think,
that's right,
the student that was working on that. I know him fairly well, and he's a really good guy, really intelligent. But they initiated the study to try to get a genetic estimate of abundance of predators. And I don't know what the outcome of that is, but I have seen some of the work that Jordan did, genetic stuff from the deer populations in Mississippi and Alabama, I think. I don't know if there were other states, but I know those two were represented. And that data was really very interesting. But this is not a deer podcast, so if you want to listen to Deer University, I think they probably cover that. So were you going to cover the numbers? You normally are the number guy, but I can do the numbers if you want. If
I'm the number guy, we're in bad shape.
I can't actually read my.
They found turkey DNA in 5% of bobcat scats, 9% of coyote scats, and this is what surprised me: 14% of gray fox scats.
Yeah, that was the same thing for me. I was like, "What? Why was there so much in the gray fox scat?" I mean, I don't think that's like an alarming rate of detection.
And it's important to, point out too that we don't know how much of this was predation versus scavenging.
That does not mean that they're killing turkeys.
Right.
That's right. But I think he also said the timing of the study, because the objective wasn't to figure out how much turkey was in it. They just took advantage of the fact that they could, because they were trying to estimate how many coyotes there were. That was the origination of the project. And they took advantage of the fact that they could also detect other species' DNA, like turkeys, in the scat. And I was surprised about that. Anyway, the reason I was telling the objectives drove when they selected, or when they were collecting scat. I think he said it was during nesting.
They missed a little bit of the early nesting period, I'm pretty sure he said.
Yeah, I think he did back up and say that. But they got most of the nesting period and some of the brooding. period.
Yeah.
They're during fawning as
Mhm.
well. But yeah, I was just thinking about, okay, that's when I would expect it probably to be the highest, I'm guessing, in any of these.
Yeah.
Because the hen is more vulnerable. We've pretty well established that over a lot of studies. And the males, that was also something that was really interesting when we were looking at the data from Patrick. He was showing how many males were dying from natural predators. Overwhelmingly, hunting was killing the majority of gobblers, but it had a very similar pattern when you looked at the predator or other predation events. There was a little hump during turkey season when they're all strutting.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, there's also a hump during turkey season because people are breasting birds and leaving carcasses out.
So it could be either one. You're right.
But
we don't know which one that is, but it was pretty curious. That gray fox had 14% versus 9% in the coyote.
Yeah, to make this even more intriguing, and again, this is just hypothetical type stuff we're talking about right now that you shouldn't necessarily draw conclusions from, but it's entertaining, I guess, to think about, or at least for somebody like me, it is. But if you go back to that podcast you're referencing earlier, the one where I told the story about the potential human scat, I also shared in that episode that gray fox were actually one of the primary nest predators in that simulated nest study that we conducted in Alabama.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like everybody gets all fired up about raccoons and coyotes. It seems like, raccoons is a nest predator and coyotes is the adult or poult predator. But like gray fox are just kind of slinking around in the background, maybe wreaking havoc from some of these data. We don't really know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you'd expect, they're predators. They got to eat. So, of course, they're probably going to eat some turkeys.
Yeah.
Especially if there's some laying around dead.
But they're not they're not a species that you hear people bring up commonly in conversation when it relates to the predation issue
Well, that's why it was striking to me. And it sounds like we took the same note. It was kind of funny that we're sitting next to each other and we were synchronized in note taking for a little while. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah.
Like every time I would go down to take my notes, I'd see you doing the same thing out of the corner of my eye.
It was just I wrote it better.
Yeah, well, if you need that.
Well, I've got one more little tidbit, fun fact.
Bring it on.
If you had to guess, which you don't have to guess because I'm sure you wrote this down too, but maybe you can't read it, so you do have to guess. South Carolina, back to South Carolina, sends out a survey to their hunters every year to find out various information related to a number of things. And Jay Cantrell was giving this talk, and he was saying that every year they kind of throw in like one kind of just gee whiz type question.
Yeah, based on what are they getting questioned about or pressure from the public?
Yeah, and he said one of the big questions that they've been getting, which is not surprising at all, is what's the role of strutter decoys in population declines? And hunters have been very vocal and passionate about that. So they added a few questions about strutter decoys to the survey this year. So if you had to guess, what percentage of hunters would you estimate use strutter decoys in South Carolina?
Well, I'm going to have to think about what I would have guessed before he said it.
Okay.
Because I have it written down and I can read it.
All right.
I would have. So what was the question again? It was how many?
What percentage of South Carolina turkey hunters do you think use strutter decoys?
So the questionnaire was, do you use strutters? Not all the time, but just do you use them sometimes?
I think the specific question was, during your last hunting season, did you use at any point a decoy with a full or partial fan or something along those lines?
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure people understand what was actually being asked.
Yeah.
And my perception would have been probably close to half.
Really? That's
what I would have thought.
I would have guessed 30 to 40% probably.
Yeah, I was thinking through that. I think there are a lot of people that, and I tend to fit into this group that just, I think it's partially because of the style of hunting I really like and I grew up doing. But man, I just hate carrying one around.
Yeah, no kidding.
I'm not going to carry a strutter around just because I don't want to carry a strutter
Yeah.
around when I'm hunting. You
Yeah.
know? I don't care if other people want to do it; that's their business. But that it's just cumbersome, and I like to run and gun and do it that way. So I usually don't have a decoy at all.
Well, I'll admit I carried a decoy on one hunt this year.
Really,
I did.
A strutter?
And it was not a strutter; it was a feeding hen.
Yeah.
But at full body, so bulky and difficult to carry. And I'll tell why in just a second, but it reminded me of why I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from the fact that I like to know that I was solely responsible for calling it to the gun, but yeah, I had this bird on my lease that had been frustrating the hell out of me, and it seems like there's always a bird in this general area, across the property line, in a field, across a big creek, and it was like the last week of the season, and I was just like, I'm going to go down there and mess with that bird. And I was like, there's no way he's coming across without anything, you know? So, but I'm not going to go, just personally, I'm not going to put up a strutter. So I put that feeding hen out there and tried it. But, you know, all I ended up with was a headache from frustration.
Yeah. I have before, but I just don't, I don't like carrying around. I think that's the main barrier.
Right.
But
back to the question.
Anyway, I would have, when I'm just thinking through, I would say the vast majority of people that I hunt have and do and try to hunt with, almost none of them use it.
Right.
A decoy.
Right.
Much less a strutter. But I don't know, my perception is that there are a lot of people that really like to use decoys, and I guess I just see it on social media so much, and
it's probably a regional thing too.
When I'm kind of, you know, when I was trying to work my way around through that, I'm balancing what do I see online versus what do my friends do versus what do I hear from people, and I kind of hedged up from what the people that I usually am, that I know what they're doing and what their take methods.
Yeah, because you thought that was an underestimate. So
I figured that was probably an underestimate just because of the general crowd.
But the actual number in South Carolina was 23%.
Yeah, that was lower than I expected.
And what is more interesting than that is that there were some follow-up questions, and Jay reported that those hunters that used those strutter decoys had the same success rate as hunters who did not, that answered no to the question. They killed the same number of turkeys throughout the season, and it took the same amount of effort to kill those turkeys. The catch per unit effort was similar between those who used strutter decoys and those that didn't.
That was a little bit striking to me as well. I was trying to mull that over because that's not what you hear everybody talk about. Most people are like, "Oh, that, you know, they're killing all the turkeys."
But you know,
that's not what
there could also be something there with, you know, related to the relative experience level of people who hunt with those decoys versus those who do not. And so maybe that kind of balances things out in the wash.
Yeah, like if
maybe it gives them some benefit, but you know, the other hunters are really good at what they do, the way they do it. You know, so it may
just kind of level the playing field that everybody has a strategy that they prefer, and it's sort of leveling out everybody's success.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people are going to yell at us in messages and say there's no way that strutter decoys don't make hunters more successful.
Yeah, we're doing is saying we're just trying to make available all this really cool, awesome information that people came here to tell people. So if you question that, you can email Will Smith. Oh man. Apparently your email address is not that hard to find because we've been getting a bunch of them that we're both tagged on.
Yeah, that's right. Yours isn't that difficult to find either.
I know.
Well, that's pretty much all I had. Did you have anything else?
Well, we've been going on for a little better than an hour here, and let me just kind of see if there's anything else in my writing I can read. I think we pretty well covered it. I do want to. There's some of the disease stuff we had several diseases that were like 25% or more of the sample birds, which a lot of them are coming from hunter-killed birds, where they have something. It's not necessarily, well, it obviously wasn't lethal because they got their face blown off by a hunter for the most part. But I just found that interesting. I wasn't expecting the prevalence levels of some of those things.
Well, I mean, with like LPDV in a lot of areas, we see prevalence of 50%.
Yeah. I think Texas, was it LPDV? They reported 40% on theirs. Is that what they said?
I don't remember.
Yep, 40% LPDV. Yeah, but there's a Tennessee study paired with it's a different aspect of the one that Harper has talked about on a previous episode.
And they found about a quarter of their birds had Newcastle disease.
Yeah, which that one is definitely from the agricultural side of things concerning, like that with in the poultry stuff. And I think that was probably one that spawned. It was like a part of the reason that research got spawned. I think we're going to do some pretty intensive disease stuff. We're getting a lot of people asking about it. I think there's enough work going on that we can probably cover it well with some experts. We need to bring some people in that are experts on that. I certainly am not that person, but I mean, that just seems like a high percentage to me.
It is for sure.
That doesn't necessarily apply everywhere, but in their study in Tennessee where they were sampling them.
Kind of circling back to what we were talking about earlier, there's still a lot to be learned about, what are the actual population implications of these various diseases. We're not sure.
That's what's so cool about North Carolina's project is they're going to connect it to things that matter.
Yeah, and start.
It's one thing to know 40% have LPDV. It's another thing to know the consequences of that.
Or not.
Yeah, it may not matter at all.
Right.
Or it may have effects that we've not realized. And you think about, well, how could you not realize that? It's like, well, a lot of our data is coming from birds that already died from something different. They got shot.
Right. So
we could get a pretty good prevalence from that and then completely miss that let's say the prevalence is 40%. Well, you still have a whole bunch of birds out there that have a 40% prevalence level that didn't die that have to contend with that pathogen.
Right.
And we don't know how that affects the rest of the population that didn't get harvested. Yeah. So I think that's pretty important, and I think that's a topic that we need to do some due diligence on. I know that we have planned to do some literature review, but also we have a few scientists in mind that are experts on disease, and we can talk through some of that.
Got plenty of more things to cover, so we're not running out of content anytime soon. Although I will say that it's kind of surprised me to hear several times as we've been at this meeting, folks telling us it's like, you guys are so productive, like I can't even keep up with all the content.
Well, I mean, I've taken there have been quite a few things here that I have really appreciated.
Yeah.
This crowd is so passionate, and I love that, and they're respectful to everybody, each other, and I think that's all great. But we've had quite a few people compliment us on what we're trying to do here, and that, we love getting that kind of feedback. It kind of helps us not only just know that people are listening, but they're getting value from it, and that's what it's all about. We're trying to help in our way, and
to hear that from people that you hold in high regard.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like a lot of the scientists I've really respected for a long time to tell me that, I appreciate that.
Yeah, me too. So if you're listening, you're one of those that stopped by and said thanks, and we really appreciate it. It means a lot to us.
Yeah, for sure. We're just trying to help in our way.
Our own little special way.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. As always, we appreciate all the help, helping us share it and rating and all that stuff. We really appreciate it. I'm really enjoying this. I hope you all are too.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.